guys, I'm here today to talk about the last 7 books I DNF'd in 2020. DNFs stands for Did Not Finish, in case you're not aware, and I am a massive fan of DNFing, which isn't to say that I seek out books that I think I won't like in order to give up on them. What I mean by that is I'm not somebody who will persevere with a book if I'm not enjoying it. 2 reasons. There are way too many books in the world I want to read and always more being published, and we all have a limited time on this earth and I want to make sure I cram as many things that I can enjoy in that time as possible. I also enjoy making and watching other people's DNF videos or videos where people talk about books they didn't enjoy. I find it as valid and important as hearing people be positive about books, because I think it gives us the ability to think more critically about books, about what we enjoy and what we don't enjoy, expectations versus reality, and I think all of that matters just as much as hearing somebody rave and be super happy about a recent read. So I have a mixture here. I have 3 that are, well, a couple that aren't massively surprising, I guess, and then I have 4 that are either big hitters or books that I really thought I would love and a lot of you guys thought I would love. So I'm going to start with the 3 that perhaps aren't as surprising, and that's because they are 2 YA books and 1 romance book, which aren't really my genres. So the romance book is Take a Hint, Dani Brown by Talia Hibbert. I read a few romance books this year, maybe 4 or 5. I hadn't read romance since I was about 18. I read a few Nora Roberts books when I was 18 and Tasmina Perry, and like Tasmina Perry, like you just follow loads of really unlikable, super wealthy people shagging each other basically, and I used to binge read those. So I'd heard lots of people rave about Talia Hibbert's books, and the first book is actually called Get a Life with Chloe Brown, but my library oddly only has the second, and so I picked it up. I got about halfway through this, and this is one of those books that I very easily could have finished, but I just couldn't really be bothered. I was enjoying it, it's nice, I see where lots of people enjoy it and like want to read the next ones. For me, this was a book where I was like, okay, I'm halfway through, they're nice enough people, I know what's going to happen, there's going to be some conflict, they're going to end up together, and like the writing isn't enough to keep me wanting to read. So yeah, like this is fine and I could easily have finished this, but I just couldn't really be bothered. So there is that one. And then we have a YA fantasy, and that is Elatsoe by Darcie Littlebadger. I picked this up for Indigathon and I got about 80 pages in before I decided to put it down. And this is one of those things where it just isn't the book for me. So this is marketed as a young adult book and the protagonist is around 17, but she reads like a 12 or 13-year-old. So I found that a bit jarring because I felt like the author wanted to write in a style that suited middle grade readers, but because of the plot and the content, which is that this protagonist has the ability to bring people and animals back from the dead, and one of her, I think, cousins is murdered, and using her ability she sort of starts to investigate that, and I guess maybe that would be a bit much for a middle grade audience, I don't know. But it was weird, I didn't think that read right and I found that quite jarring, and then there was just a couple of odd things that just didn't sit right with me. So one of them is that her best friend, who you're told she's been best friends with for like ever, reveals to her in like the first few chapters that he's the descendant of some type of magical people and he's like royalty, and she's like, what? As if? And I'm thinking, like, if you guys have been best friends for your whole life and he casually drops it in like it's not some big reveal or secret and it wasn't something he was supposed to be not telling her, I just don't see how that wouldn't have come up. And I think it was written in that way to make us as readers aware, but I just think it could have been dropped into conversation in a more believable way. So a couple of things like that happened and I just didn't feel like this book was written for me, in terms of I'm a really picky middle grade and YA reader, and the writing style of this one just didn't sit right with me. The next one was another YA fantasy, and this was actually in my end of year TBR video, and that is The Harm Tree by Rose Edwards. So I saw this on the library bookshelf, I thought it had a beautiful cover, I looked into it, thought it sounded interesting, and so I picked it up. I got about 80 or 100 pages into this one, which is maybe a quarter or a fifth of the way through. And this is another one of those ones that I very much could have persevered with, but I always find that I get even more good at DNFing towards the end of the year, because I'm thinking, well, I've only got so many more weeks left to read, I've got all these amazing like possible 5-star reads on my shelves, why waste time with a book that feels like it's maybe only going to end up being maximum 3 stars. So like I said, this is a YA fantasy, and it did seem like my sort of thing in that this wasn't really plot heavy, this didn't seem to have an insta-love in it. We're following 2 female friends, one of whom I think might be queer, although that hadn't been fully explored in the like sections I was up to. I think this is inspired by Norse mythology, and right at the start they see a man try to like steal something that's really important, and then one of them picks it up, and then somehow loads of important people get involved. And yeah, do you know what, I think the reason I put this down is because I was a bit confused, and I do read fantasy, although I haven't read as much as I would like in recent times, and I did find that for a YA fantasy this was pretty confusing. The author has developed sort of 2 religions, so she's made this sort of big landmass that sort of narrows at a certain point, and on either side of the landmass there's 2 different religions, 2 different mythologies, different political systems, and these girls are both from the north and they are living in the south because their families couldn't afford to keep them anymore. And so you're getting lots of discussion around all the religion and politics and societal expectations, and I was just very confused. There was lots of names, there was lots of history and lore, and I don't know, maybe I just wasn't in the right headspace for this one because I feel like it had the right sort of pace for me. So if you've read it, I would be intrigued, because out of all these books I've just mentioned, this is the only one I would consider going back to. Now on to 2 of the books that you guys have recommended to me the most. So I have 3 books that I've owned each for, I reckon, around 5 years. I mention them the most in TBR videos, and people mention them the most to me, saying, I know you've got this book and I think you could really love it. One of those is British by F.U. Hirsch, which I have read and will talk about in my December wrap up when that is uploaded. And so I decided to try and get through all 3 of these, and sadly the other 2 ended up being DNFs. So one of them is The Vegetarian by Han Kang. This is translated by Deborah Smith, and I've had this since 2015, 2016, because it won the Booker International in 2016. I have read, what's the other one called? Human Acts, and enjoyed it, and so I always thought I would enjoy this one. And this gets really mixed reviews because some people just find it too weird and unsettling, and some people really enjoy that. And I got about 100 pages into this one, so like nearly halfway, and just decided this wasn't for me. And this is a book that I can see why so many people would really love it. This is just a writing style that I don't enjoy. So I've mentioned a fair amount in the last few months on the channel that I've realised even more about my reading that something I struggle with is sort of cold, detached stories, and this is a perfect example of that. This is exploring something really interesting, the writing style is interesting, very well written, but the character is super cold and detached. I struggled with that. And another issue I had with this is that this is translated as The Vegetarian in English, but really this woman is becoming a vegan. She has a dream which makes her think she shouldn't eat any animal products, and she starts to starve herself, and it's about 3 members of her family who are trying to control her eating and really control her. And it's a commentary really on sexism and the patriarchy, particularly in South Korean culture. And I get all that, but I think as somebody who's a vegan, I found the use of one really important topic, that being animal cruelty and the awful things we will do to living creatures that don't want to die any more than you or I do, as an allegory or a commentary on another massive issue, that being sexism and the patriarchy. I found that a bit dismissive of the problems of animal cruelty. I don't think that one societal issue should be used as a foil for another. And I know I'll probably get comments on this video being like, oh my god, I can't believe that you think that animal rights are as important as human rights. I do, because we are animals, and without the base level of agreeing that every animal deserves the right to live and to not suffer, how can we ever expect to have a decent society? If we build our society on that foundation, then all other forms of abuse and cruelty and suffering done to humans would therefore be dismissed. That is my thought process, guys, and so didn't love the writing style, and also didn't like the use of the allegory of animal cruelty for patriarchy. So there's that. And then an even bigger shock, because I have read and loved another book by this author, is Mariana by Monica Dickens. So I read The Winds of Heaven by this author quite a few years ago and really enjoyed it. I thought it was a delightful read. And I've had so many people say in my videos, you will love this book, because I really enjoy I Capture the Castle, I love coming of age stories, I love slow, cosy family dramas, and that is what this book is. And I loved the first 80 pages, I was really enjoying it, and then it just carried on going downhill. So I got up to page 200, this is a 370 page book, and in the end I was like, this is really bothering me. And so I started to look at other reviews, found a couple of reviews that were a bit more negative. In general, people seem to really enjoy it, and I just thought, no, I'm not just going to force myself to spend the last couple of days of 2020 reading a book that is bothering me. This book opens with a woman called Mary who is fearing that her husband has died in the war, and she's waiting to find out, and she starts to reminisce and look back on her life. And so she starts thinking about her life when she's around 8, and we follow her from there. So I love the first 80 pages because you're following her from the ages of sort of 8 to 11. It's so cosy, so cute. You hear lots of stuff about like roaring fireplaces and lovely cosy food, and I was really enjoying it. The only issue I had with it is that I found this book hasn't aged well, in that everyone is criticised for their weight, the way they look, any characters that we're supposed to pity or mock or dislike. We are told that by the way they are described physically. So we're told that somebody has clammy hands or bad breath, or they're fat or ugly. I'm not a fan of that. It's not nice, it's not kind, and I think it was much more prevalent in older books, and as a contemporary reader it's hard to read. And it's not a little bit, it's on nearly every page. So that was bothering me, but I was like, you know, maybe she'll change as she gets a bit older. She does. She gets much worse, properly criticising everybody, and then the awful like perverts in this book. There's so many disgusting men, and every now and again there's a commentary on it, but in general I think we're just supposed to think that men were like this at the time and like it wasn't a big deal. So one of her uncles says to Mary, she brings her friend to visit, they're both 13, and he makes a comment about the fact that her friend must have been sexy when she was an embryo, and to save her friend for him when she's a little bit older, because like he's really interested in her. She's 13, she's the same age as his niece. It's absolutely fucking gross. And there's another point where Mary is out with a man who she's interested in, they lose one another at a party, and she ends up being sort of stuck behind with this other man. And when she finds the man who she's at the party with, he's like, oh, I've lost you for a while, but I thought Nick might be raping you. And then we move on to the next paragraph. Like, Mary doesn't even think what an awful thing for him to have said, anything, we just move straight on. So stuff like that, can't bear. In general, Mary's not a nice character, she's very self-obsessed, she's not very kind to people. And I did see some comments from people saying she does become a better person, there's a twist at the end and all that. I haven't got the patience for it, and I don't think this book has aged well, and I'm actually interested in rereading The Winds of Heaven to see if it was so prevalent in that book, because I can't remember it, but I did read it quite a few years ago when perhaps I wouldn't have noticed things like that as much. So yeah, this was a real letdown for me. So I know lots of you have loved it, so I'd like to know your thoughts on it down below. While we're on the subject of pervy older men, we may as well get this next one out of the way, and that is Volume 2 of the Book of Dust, that being The Secret Commonwealth. So I really enjoyed the first book in The Secret Commonwealth. I really loved the first 3/4 of that book, and then I found the last 100 pages became a little bit episodic, so I gave it 4 stars. I heard really mixed things about this one. I heard that a lot of the commentary was a bit too obvious in terms of commentary on Brexit and the refugee crisis and things like that, but I wanted to give it a go. And I got 144 pages into this exactly. If you have this edition, you can flick to page 144 and you will know why I DNF'd it. I mean, I'm going to tell you anyway. So this is like, you know, a slight spoiler in that it doesn't happen to until page 144, but I don't think it's a massive spoiler. So, and like I had a couple of people comment on my TBR video when I mentioned this, mentioning they had this issue, but they didn't go into detail because obviously they didn't want to spoil it. I think if I had known in detail, I wouldn't have even bothered trying to read this one. So I was really enjoying it. Not as much as the first one, but I was enjoying it. This follows Lara when she is a young woman, she's about 21. Plodding along, enjoying this book, cosy, thinking, yeah, this is going to be a nice book to sort of round out the year with, cosy, sort of bit of fantasy. And then, if you don't know, in the first book of the Secret Commonwealth trilogy, is it going to be, We follow a young boy called Malcolm who is, I think, 11, and he looks after Lara when she is a baby, and he delivers her to the school where she grows up. And then it is revealed in this book, Lara is 21 and he is still a teacher at one of the local colleges. So he's been very present in her life. She doesn't know who he is, but he has seen her grow from a 1-year-old to a 21-year-old, and he, for a time when she was a teenager, was actually her teacher. We meet him, it's all plodding along fine, and then he mentions the fact that he is attracted to her, like sexually attracted to her, and I was thinking, oh, like, I have no issue with you being 10 years older than her. I do, however, have an issue with the fact that you knew her since she was a baby, and you've sort of been like a distant uncle figure in her life, and you have watched her grow up. Slightly fucking creepy. And then he goes on to say, like, I was even smelling her hair when she was 14 and I was 24 and I was teaching her, and like a bit attracted to her then, and I was like, fuck off, Philip Pullman, what is wrong with you? How did this person edit her? You have disappointed me massively. I was so pissed off. And I flipped to the back and looked at the photo of him and I just thought, fuck you, Philip Pullman, like, what is wrong with you? Like, it's 2020, like, how does this shit happen? How does it pass an editor? It is not okay to write a character that we're supposed to like being 24 and teaching a 14-year-old and wanting to bang her. It's absolutely rank and it's perverted. And also, I checked people's reviews and people said that it's not like, because I was like, maybe this is going to be a commentary and later on in the novel, like, Malcolm's going to get told off for it, in which case fine. But people were like, oh no, he speaks to other female characters and they say to him, oh, you're both adults, like, it's absolutely fine, and like justify his feelings, which I was like, you know what, no, I'm done with this. So I DNF'd it. And interestingly, I'm aware that some people will say, oh, you know, I agree that is an issue, but like, what about if the rest of the book is good? And my thought on that is, if we continue to condone these sorts of storylines being okay in books in this day and age, then it's never going to stop. And if we condone these things in fiction, in TV and film and books, then they'll continue to be perpetuated in stories, and therefore it will seep into like reality that we condone these things. So it's not okay, even if it's part of a much wider story. If it's put there as something that's acceptable in this day and age, I don't want to be reading it, watching it, whatever. No. And then lastly, this one is also, this has got mixed reviews, but it did just win the Booker, so you guys probably know. It is Shuggie Bain by Douglas Stuart. This book, if you don't know, is about a young boy growing up in Thatcher era Glasgow in Scotland to his alcoholic mother. He is the youngest of 3 children, and we follow his life growing up with his mother. The book opens when he is much older, living alone in a flat, and then we sort of go back to when he's around 4 years old. So, first chapter of this book, not when he's in the flat as an adult, but when he's like 4 years old, I thought it was brilliant. You open, you're watching his mother, she's with a group of her friends, they're playing cards and gambling and drinking in her flat, and I thought it was beautifully written, a wonderful commentary on women and how they have relationships together, particularly working class women, and I loved it. And I thought he's got such an eye for writing these women in a way that a lot of people would think is sordid, but in a way that has so much love and affection, and I thought it was brilliant. And I was thinking, if it carries on like this, then I'm going to really enjoy it. I understood people's commentary about the fact that it doesn't feel like a book, because even though I admired that chapter, I agree that it doesn't feel like a book. Like, I think the Booker generally choose books that are challenging and innovative and very stylised, and this isn't. This is sort of like a very readable literary book. So I got that commentary, but I was like, you know, I'm enjoying it, let's carry on. And it felt like it was probably going to be like a 4-star read, like a solid 4-star. I got, I think, around halfway through this one in the end, and then I was just like, I just can't be arsed. So we get to a certain point, maybe 100 pages in, where we sort of jump forward quite a few years, and Shuggie ends up being sort of living alone with his mother, and he's a little bit older, maybe closer to the age of 8 or 9 or something like that. And I just felt like every chapter got quite repetitive. I felt like I really didn't enjoy the story much when it was focused on Shuggie and his siblings rather than his mother, and it was moving away from his mother and moving more towards them, and I just wasn't interested anymore. I felt like the strongest bit of writing had been that first chapter, and then after that it just all went a bit downhill, and I was thinking, I'm halfway through, we've got another 200 pages, and I feel like I've read it and it's just going to sort of carry on. And I also did feel like the further into this book we got, it did get a bit overwrought. So I've heard quite a lot of comparisons to A Little Life by Han Kang, which I absolutely detest. One of the worst books I've ever finished. And I do see their similarities because in general, Douglas Stuart's writing style is fine. On a sentence by sentence level, he writes fine. Solidly good writer, but there's nothing really spectacular about his writing, and that is how I felt about Han Kang's writing in A Little Life. Although Han Kang also writes some awful fucking metaphors, which Douglas Stuart doesn't do as much. A Little Life is also very well known for dealing with really horrible topics and like properly going there, and one of the things I really detested about that book was how emotionally manipulative it was. You could constantly see the author behind the scenes. She wanted you to be devastated, she wanted you to be appalled, and she never let you feel those feelings subtly. She always wanted to sort of amp up to 100 and force you that these feelings, like, you were spoon-fed. You were never allowed to, you know, figure things out for yourself and feel those feelings. And again, this is nowhere near as bad as A Little Life in my opinion for that, but I did start to feel that more and more. For example, there's a scene where we know that Shuggie is abused in some way, and it's glossed over, and then he's in a hospital and he's talking to a nurse and he says, oh, what happens, you know, to my granddad when he dies? Is he gonna be picked up by a taxi to go to heaven? And she said, oh, it's not really like that. Your body doesn't go to heaven, just your soul. And then he sort of responds by saying that he's really glad to hear that. And you as the reader, that should be enough for you. You've read the awful scene where you know something horrible has happened to him physically. You've heard him say that he's glad his body won't go to heaven with him and he's leaving it behind. You can put it together. But no, Douglas Stuart gives us the next sentence, which is something along the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing here, so if somebody did some awful things to me behind a bike shed, I haven't got to take that body with me. And I just thought, like, could you not have trusted us to figure that out? Like, I find that really frustrating. And I just felt that more and more things like that happened. So I could have finished this book. This is one of those books that wasn't that bad. I could have finished it. I might have ended up giving it 3 stars, but I just felt like it wasn't going to do anything different in the second half than it had already done in the first. And I couldn't really be bothered with reading another 200 pages of the same thing that was annoying me a bit. So those are the last books of the year I DNF'd. I feel like there was quite a lot of ranting with those last 4 books, so I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, and yeah, I'm sure some of you will completely disagree with me, which is absolutely fine. I'm always intrigued by the reasons people think different things about books or, you know, films or TV. And yeah, I'd love to chat to you in the comments about these books down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!